Okay. So sometimes we got all nice, cool people on the program, and sometimes you get carried away, just start chatting it out. Okay, so what I was hoping to do is lay out what we were hoping to do. Scott and I working together on this is lay out sort of the components of the work that we would be doing, and then get into a phase of discussion on some details and who's going to do what. So I'm going to try to run through this, and some of it will be maybe a little bit repetitive, but hopefully not really that much. And I will go right now, but please raise your hand, and you can, Scott, let me know if anybody has their hand raised.
Sure.
If anybody has, just please interrupt me, please. Okay, so we all know that this is our homework that we're doing this year. We want to go through the improvement steps on the bottom, and we're focused on this team people side on this end right now. And we essentially could apply these improvement steps either to all the things like processes, technology, and people, but the one that could be done separately as well is the organization and workforce improvement. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And so we thought that we would kind of eat our own dog food and put a little bit of a, not exactly a BPMN, but at least diagram it a little bit, and how this would be happening, so that we would start by initiating a planning for the maturity assessment, and then define this just high level scope and goals that we have. And if the scope and goals are just to look at the organizational workforce, then the first thing we want to do is plan maturity assessment, because that's the first step in our improvement cycle. So the next thing I'm going to do is show, we would then drill down and see what does this planning include. And this is, we're going to come back to this slide at the end of the presentation. This is just a draft. It's to be discussed. And this is what we thought we would try to construct today, this plan maturity assessment, because we don't currently have that.
And this would be the process, right, Cello, that a utility would go through, in order to implement it.
Yeah, before they start the maturity assessment, define scope and goals, form the team, identify stakeholders. These are just examples here. Scott has additional thought. So the idea is we come back later and flesh out this planning process. Then if the after the planning process is how to actually conduct the workforce and organizational maturity assessment as is. So in the next slide, I'm going to show what this looks broken down. And we would initiate the statement. We would include the team, scope, goals, stuff that comes out of the planning. And then we would adopt the maturity model. We have one that we developed, adopt tier 1 questions we have that can use as a template. We have an assessment tool in Microsoft Forms already, and we have a reporting tool in Power BI. And then we would finalize this maturity assessment, and we would, excuse me, this needs to go. I'm sorry, I mean, I need to cut that off, the end maturity. It just finalized maturity assessment. I'm going to kill this later. So then when we're done with maturity, then we'd go, the maturity models are based on, assessments are based on maturity models. You know that we have this model already. Then we analyze and perform the maturity assessment. We have the presentation. We've gone through all of this. We have more detailed. So this is just an example for that one box. This is what the tools look like. we have stuff in SharePoint, and we have forms in place. When the forms are sent out, automatically results are saved in Excel. We would ingest that data from Excel, run Power BI, then we would get those dashboards. So I just want to stop right now. Does this sound familiar, clear? No questions?
I have a quick question,
Sure.
Cello, as always. So you just said we do this. Are you talking the organization that's conducting it? They would have the Power BI tool. They would have all that stuff.
Yeah, they could just pick up the tool that is already there posted.
Okay.
So, for example, Mike Barnett tested the tool. I sent him the Excel file and the tool, so it was working for you, right, Mike?
That's right. Yeah, it works pretty well. You just have
Okay.
to download it and download the software and load up the file.
But right now it's pointing to the results that I made up. But when you send out, you can download Microsoft forms for tier 1. It's just one form, and that form, then people respond. It automatically fills out. You set it up to, you point to a Excel file where you want that sent. And then you run Power BI against that Excel file. So all of this is in place, and the artifacts that you can get already is this is the Power BI program that's used to generate those dashboards and everything. This is the spreadsheet that maps to that Microsoft Forms file that when people answer the survey, that's this one on the right? That's what the Microsoft form look at. It has all these questions. When they answer the questions, you will point it where you want the questions to be saved in an Excel file, and then Excel file, you point this Power BI program to that Excel file, so you don't have any programming to do. You just kind of set up the files, and I can help you with this, or Mike Barnett can help you with this, and we can, write up the guidelines. But the idea is that people would start using this. So I'm going to stop. Does this answer your question, Kaysra?
Yeah, yes, it does. And I guess I think that maybe we might want to we'll probably put some instructions together, right? So people know that they can download the form, that they can.
Yes.
They're going to have to pull it into their own servers. We don't want or they might not want their information sitting on your server, right? So we'll have to sort of point them as to what they need to do to set this up.
Well, yeah, and they would have a choice. If they want to use the analysis locally, they should definitely do it. They can put those files wherever your organization wants. If they don't share it with others, that's fine. But we're not going to be ever able to, if they're not shared, they could be confidentially shared. If they're not shared, it would be more difficult to compare different utilities to compare their results.
I mean, our recommendation would be so that we can do that comparison. But I was just wondering if we're going to provide that option to people to.
Yeah, sure. No problem at all.
There may be an option, an in-between option too, Kaysra, where you do it locally, but certain data in the end is uploaded.
Yep. Yep, that makes sense too.
So that way we, define the improvement, the goals of the improvement. Then the goals of the improvement are targeting organization and workforce. We have that process that we still want to build, how to plan the maturity assessment. And now we have the tools and the methods in place to conduct the assessment, and it will produce a file. It will produce, assessment results for the tier 1 questions. So this is tier 1 done. This first step, system maturity, assessing system maturity. And what we're looking for is for organizations to do pilots. So then once there is once we have the tier 1 assessment results, then the second step is to do analysis of as-is system state. So the first thing that they would probably want to do is review this maturity assessment result for tier 1, and everything is peachy and wonderful and no vulnerabilities have been identified, then you're pretty much done. Everything is great. But if some vulnerabilities have been identified, then you'd go to the tier 2 follow-up, which also exists currently. We have tier 2 statements. Since they haven't been completely vetted, we don't yet have analysis tool, but it would not be that difficult to develop something similar to what we had for tier 1, and the reporting tool, same thing. So these are the tasks. These tasks here, we will still need to develop and map out. Does this make sense?
Yep.
And just to comment, meanwhile, the change management team is over there identifying what does a process look like in order to implement changes that are, fall out of the analysis. And that would be, a potential next step after that, which we aren't putting on here right now, but just to know that in tier 2, we're trying to identify some positive actions that could be taken. We're imagining that there would be a workshop that would be held and you'd have some consensus about how to move forward. There could even be potentially communication with let's say the management of the organization in order to make sure that they're integrated. So there would be some steps after tier 2 is the bottom line.
Right. So we also have the same kinds of things already for tier 2. We have the Microsoft Forms. We have, format for. We haven't developed, the Power BI thing because I still want to get consensus on the tier 2 questions. But if once we get agreement on that would be an important thing, we can go forward. So artifacts for tier 2, we have Microsoft Forms there. As soon as people are fine with them, we can move forward to build the, Power BI tools. Each of them has both in spreadsheet format and in Microsoft Forms format. It's all already posted. Okay. So they're right now in PDF format as well. So then the next step is design the to-be state. This is again something that we would, like Scott says, we would need to flesh out, because now when we have should say tier 1, tier 2 assessment results. I have to modify this. But basically, we would then look into the third state, design the to-be system state. And I just for now said pre-design, design, final design, but this really would need to be fleshed out. We're not quite, Scott and I were reluctant to go too far on this without having a collaborative input from utilities. But this is something that really, as we move forward and we nail them down, the maturity and the system analysis, the design is something that may even include, like Scott said, people from change management as well. So that's the scope ahead of us. So the action plan, immediate action plan, includes the following 3 things. One is to run the pilots for tier 1 where we have all these things in place, and it would address this first box, assess system maturity, and get some results back. So we're looking for utilities who would be willing to do that in their organization. to you to on a certain business unit, on a certain stakeholders, or a certain process, whatever makes sense for them. That's number one action. Number two is to finalize this analysis and the method and the tools. So we're talking about these boxes. This is another piece of work that needs to be done here. And the third three is flesh out these remaining steps, like planning, improvement, implementing, and monitor performance. So we're not quite there yet. So eventually, all of these things that we're doing, like on this left side, and here we're in a similar situation with the process and with technology. It'll be basically all interfacing with change management. So I'm going to stop here and see if there are any comments, because I think I've talked way too much. Mike Sweeney, what do you think?
I'm following you, Cello. I think it seems to make sense.
Okay, so Parijat, does that make sense to you? And what do you think that Kansas City could take on?
I think that she had to step away, Cello.
Yeah, okay. Let me see. Kesra, do you think that perhaps Great Lakes would be willing to or interested in performing any of these things?
Cello, let me ask around a little bit, because, like I said, with these projects that have just started, everyone's calendars are really full. So let me see if I can reach out to our change leadership manager and see if this is something we can do as a combined effort with her.
Okay.
And
yeah.
Roxy's on the phone, and I'll just mention that, Lisa has said that she wants to identify a process area or a function, to do this as well. I think that, and Parijat has, if you're back on, speak up, Parijat, but she's indicated that she's looking at something as well.
Cello, I will definitely share these slides with Marco to get his input. Additionally, Marco asked me to mention that he's in executive leadership meeting. He's in an executive leadership meeting, which is the reason why he's not on the call this morning.
Yeah.
That'd be great. The other thing that I want to mention is, Phil, is I had Marco and I had a conversation, and I would like to get his input and on these questions and the method to make sure that we are incorporating those key aspects of DEI that he is the subject matter expert on, and also see if there are any additions that he would like to suggest. We're already, we were asked to have 10 questions. We have 18, so we may not be able to expand it, drastically.
Okay.
Roxy's
yeah. And Roxy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I followed it pretty well. I would definitely have to look into it to see if it's something that we could test in my area as well. I don't have any ideas or projects at the moment, but I could kind of check around and see if it's something that we could do.
Okay.
So, Cello, quick question for you. So if we were to do this, we would run the pilot for obviously the tier 1 questions. Are we going to have, so when we do the assessment of the results to see whether we need tier 2, is there going to be some kind of artifact that will be that, we can provide to say, if your maturity level, when you're assessing our system maturity, if you're at this level, then you should go to question number 2 or tier 2 questions. Like, are we going to provide something like that? And then obviously change management isn't really ready. So let's say we do the tier 2. Let's say we find some areas that we need to improve on. Then part of the pilot, are we going to say, okay, so if you are at this level now after your tier 2, here are the improvements that we recommend? Because we don't have that part of it yet, right? We're just saying test tier 1 and tier 2, just the assessment tool for now. That's all we're piloting, not our improvement.
Well,
I can answer this, or Scott, I can answer it as well. I think that partially you're correct. The maturity assessment we do have in place, but then you need to, the way you would decide whether you need tier 2 is that you would look at these things. You would look at these results. You would see whether you know the maturity is very high or it's very low. And then tier 2 is really about, it's not further going into detail of tier 1, but it's looking at each one of these areas and said it includes statements about possible things that could be improved. So the report that you would get from tier 1 would show you, if everything is in red, you may, like it shows here, it would show you which areas you are, you have vulnerabilities. And then for tier 2, there is a set of tier 2 questions for each one of those. So you would select those where you didn't score so high on these things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just, sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I was just going to add was that by the time you finish tier 1, tier 2 should be ready to use. When you finish tier 2, a change process would be, at least outlined and available to use as well. So I think that we'll go to the planning phase here in a minute, but part of your internal planning that you wind up doing could take account of that, so that people understand that you'd be doing phase 1, but it would lead to phase 2, would lead to change and improvements. The last comment is that we may or may not, and maybe not, get overly prescriptive in terms of what you ought to do for a particular low score. What you wind up doing is getting input in tier 2 of some actions that the stakeholders are thinking would be effective, and the actual solutions that you come up with could be more local than prescribed as part of our effort.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. I think we don't want to be too prescriptive, but just some guidelines, because if people say, well, okay, so my organizational goals, I'm so low on, I scored really low, and then maybe part of change management, here are the different things you can do, right?
Yeah. Although I don't think we're relying on change management for technology and people and processes to say, here's what you do about it. It's more, here's a process that you follow in order to implement the priorities and the changes that your organization comes up with. But you're right that we could point to research, we could point to some ideas of improvements that could be made in those different kinds of areas.
And I think it'll be, I think it may be instructive to look at an example to remind us what tier 2 really looks like.
Right.
And I'm gonna if you give me just a second, I'm gonna pull up just an example for one of the layers, so we can see what exactly are what exactly is there. So give me just 1 second, please. I'm almost there. So I will show you. So this, let's say that these are the results, this organizational strategy and performance that we're looking at. If we look at tier 2, and that, let's say that this was like not good, or just for the sake of argument. So then we would go to tier 2, organizational strategy and performance, and we would see what the questions look like. I mean, what the tier 2 looks like. And they're really not questions, they're statements. So for example, organization should involve employees on my levels in the development. Let me see if I can make it bigger. Just a second.
Yeah, so except for the first question, everything is are positive statements that would give you some input from the people filling out the tier 2 assessment as to improvements that they would like to see.
Yeah, give me just a second. I should have done something else. I should have gone not to Microsoft Forms. Just a second. I should have gone to. I should have gone to the. Give me just 1 second. The PDF file so that I can blow it up properly. So well, where is wise assessment, people? This is tier 1. Okay, I don't have, I can't find it. There are.
You could use what you had, Cello. I mean, it would work.
Yeah, it is. I'm sorry. Where is my thing? The thing is that I can't blow it up very easily. That's it. So if you guys can read it, then it's fine. Can you guys read this?
Yeah.
Okay. So it says, taking active steps to eliminate favoritism in hiring, promotion opportunities, learning, and advancement. How much it would help from 1 to 5. Taking active steps to ensure that merit rather than personal preferences. Clearly define and communicate organizational values. So it's really stated in the something that allows us to define the to be state. It's not further going down into the negative thing, but it's or implement a fair and effective process ensuring that everyone adheres to the organizational values. These are the same statements that we have developed, except that they've been turned, the questions have been turned into statements that are more positive in terms of what the to be should look like, or hold leadership, management, and staff accountable for not following the organizational values. Now, when you get these things, then you would still have to look at these results and say how you're actually going to do it and create a plan. And that's what Scott was talking about. But tier 2 is therefore not really no longer part of maturity assessment. It's more part of a looking, analyzing the system and looking for how to build it to be.
So it's mapped to the tier 1 questions and results, and then these would be the kind of things that your stakeholders or participants would identify and rate as things that could make a difference. And then on the how, like Cello said, how you would do that internally is something that needs to be worked on.
Okay, so does that make sense to you?
Yep, absolutely.
Do we have Parijat back?
No, she had to leave. She had to leave early. She commented.
Okay. Mike Sweeney, my favorite victim.
Yeah, Mike didn't say also whether there might be an area of interest in his organization that he and Rebecca or whomever might want to pilot.
Yeah, I'll, I have some thoughts in our organization. I'll have to kind of figure out who would be willing to do this.
Yeah.
I think it'd be great for us to test it.
Yeah, and Mike Sweeney's offline. But, it's possible that Baltimore might even be interested because they're definitely interested in change management, and this would help link, a particular process area that they want to improve to workforce as well as change management and process.
Phil, one thing that I would recommend is when you speak to Marco, you might want to include Ramona Harry in the conversation, because she's from City of Baltimore and she's the lead on the change management effort. So it would be really, that would be really helpful, because although we had to break this up into different pieces, we should really maintain collaboration and communication across different efforts so that each effort helps other efforts as well,
Sure, I will be meeting with Marco and Ramona. Ramona and I spoke last week, so we'll get the ball rolling relative to meeting and having this discussion.
Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Well, Cello, did you want to go back to that other slide and we could talk a little bit, I think, about the planning effort that you would undertake, and we'd like some input on things that we would want to include here. I think one thing that's come out just in this discussion is that whoever is coordinating this in the utility is going to need some special training and skills in order to be able to do that coordination. But this is aimed at that planning the maturity assessment, within your utility, and what are the kinds of things that would need to be included. And rather than me throwing out some more items, maybe you should look at this. We have initiate the planning phase, and what would be included in that effort, making sure that you've defined the scope and the goals of the improvement that you're trying to achieve, forming your team, identifying the stakeholders, and Cello just put in coordination of efforts or training as a couple items. What else would be required on your side, and might you think of, rather than just sending out written instructions, perhaps you'd want a meeting or a workshop in order to go over this, before you begin? Feedback.
So these are some things that I'm just popping up.
Yeah, what
And-
else? You might want to have a schedule. You might want to have, clear roles and responsibilities. We have the process here, but we haven't really done, what some of us call swim lanes or racy or something like that, that would include, what the expectations are for the different people who are involved.
And just to let you know, what we can do is that each one of these things can be what's called a collapsed process, which means that we have here, let me explain what I mean. When we said here, conduct workforce and organizational culture, this thing here, this symbol, means that if you were in a business process model thing, that when you click on that, it would expand and show what does this activity actually include. So when we are working on this, we don't need to have all the possible things one has to do on this one sheet. But for example, form the team could be a collapsed process where you have it here. but then you could add one of these symbols and have the steps of how you'd go to form the team, how would you assign responsibilities, and you can attach some artifacts, show how it looks like and stuff like that, so that instead of having just narrative guidelines, people have, visual representation as well.
So Kesra, maybe, and others, if you were basically going to take what we've talked about here, a tier 1 that leads to tier 2, that leads to change and all that, and you were pulling this together as a coordinator in your organization, what are the things that you would want to include in that planning process that we've defined? Cello's thrown in some boxes, but what are some aspects that come to mind?
I would definitely add a checklist of all the different things that should be done under each one of these. So define scope and goals, great. But you identify, to define even the scope and goals, you got to identify your stakeholders, you got to identify the process, timeline, So I think if we had a checklist to say under each one of these process boxes, these are the things, so you can check mark them off as you do them.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are a lot of steps within each step. There are a lot of things that we should do within each step. Because even right now, as I'm thinking, and I just sent an email. I'm sorry, I was doing that while I was listening to you, but I sent off an email to Deborah Anderson. She's part of our transformation team. It's called Transformation. For some reason, it's under finance because Nikki, way back when, had this vision of having a transformation team. So our CFO hired her. I just sent her an email. I believe last year she had said something about wanting to join the effort. And, I totally, I know she was having conversations with Jody and whoever's, but I wasn't involved in it. So I just sent her an email to find out if she's interested in joining this team, because I think she could really also help identify an area in our organization where we can do this. So, and she's pretty good at change management and all that good stuff. So I think a checklist is really important. So for me, if I'm talking to her, what I'm going to tell her, right? So I'm going to say, I'm going to have Cello give me a link to this PowerPoint. I might just pick a couple of different slides and put together a real summary to say, here's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And to get that buy-in from people, right? If I go to Jody today and say, hey, I want to do this assessment, it's going to say, okay, what does it entail? So I want a 2 or 3 slide deck of 2 or 3 slides, very concise, very to the point. Say, here's what we want to do. Here are the things, the tools that WISE is going to provide us, and here is what is the level of effort we're going to have to put in. And
so one thing you brought up that Cello was schedule. In other words, the timing of things. You mentioned that. So we could just throw it could be part of the process, but that's something that we need to include, a checklist and schedule. And then what you're asking for is almost separate from this process, which is what are a few slides that kind of help explain what it is and what the value proposition is for your organization, that you could, that wouldn't be in this form, but would be something that you could present to leadership. Yeah.
Correct. And because, so right now, if I say I wanted to do my enterprise asset management group, I'll have to go to Jody. Those 2-3 sites help convince him I want to do it. But tomorrow, when I want to go to Nikki's group and go to finance and say, hey, here's something we can do, right? We need to be able to explain those. And I would love to present something like that in one of our AMLT meetings as well, so that you have the Cheryl Porters and the Naveen, the COOs and the CIO, and they're all in that room. to say, here, we've got a really great tool that they can use in their areas and groups.
Yeah, a lot of us are getting familiar with business process model view of things. You've
Right.
also mentioned that stair step, kind of chart that we've also used, which almost has step one, and then step two, step three, step four, so
Correct.
leading to, results, that just kind of, tell a story as well.
Right.
Okay, so does this make sense? Am I capturing what you wanted to say? That the that what you'd like, that what would be produced out of this is a checklist of deliverables, including schedule, responsibility matrix, goals, resources. Is that what you were thinking?
So that will be the result of it, right? But as an organization, what do I need to do to get those deliverables?
Okay, so what, just a second. Let me
Yeah, we're
just show you.
talking about two things, really. I mean,
Yeah.
on the one hand, you're saying, how do I justify this? And then here is the planning process that you wind up having once
Yes.
you've decided to go ahead.
Exactly. The two different things. One is, okay, what's the value proposition for doing all of this? That's really a slide deck that doesn't have to be part of this, but it explains why this is important. But then the second part is, when we're defining our scope and goals, that's where we say, here's a checklist of the things you should be looking at when you're defining your scope and goals. Do you have the appropriate stakeholders in this? Are you talking to the right people? Who's the team members that's gonna do this? And which is the box that Cello's put up there, right? A
Yeah.
checklist of deliverables.
Well,
So that you sort of, but to get to those during that defines, yeah.
okay. So the way we would do this in the modeling world is that we would say, okay, then you would take this one alone and you would make that into a diagram that is below, one level below. And there you could go to town. You could
Right.
go, you can go to as much detail as you'd like, but many years ago, I was working with a predecessor, sort of predecessor to BPMN. What was the acronym? Mike Barnett, you remember
You're thinking of IDEF?
the IDEF, exactly. And one of the things in IDEF is the rule that you should never have more than 7 boxes on a diagram. Because if you start having more than 7 boxes on a diagram, you could have 8. Nobody's going to put you in IDEF jail. But to put it hierarchically, so you don't end up with something that's,
I agree, and I would not even begin to suggest we put any boxes on here. I'm just saying have a checklist, right? It's another tool to say, so you
in
define.
principle. But you were saying two things. You were saying that you need to define a list of things that needs to be produced by this, which is excellent point. But you were also saying that you want to say how exactly are you going to do this. And if you want to describe how exactly you're going to define the scope and the goals, better way to do it is to take this one box and blow it up, into what's underneath.
Yeah, so for example, Kesra, you taking defined scope and goals, it depends on how deeply you want to get into that. But another one of the teams is really dealing with taking a business process area. I will just say it's CIP development or purchasing or something like that, and they're actually laying out what is the current state or as is state of that particular process, and they're doing it in this with these boxes. Another way to do it, I mean, if you're going to be just more macro level, is to say, well, we're going to take this area and we have some ultimate end outcome goals that we're trying to accomplish for that. And we want to start by looking at the culture and the workforce of and stakeholders that are involved in that particular process, and then maybe get to the other later. But
Just one.
you could, if you've, like in some utilities like Kansas City, where they've already laid out the business process, but they haven't really engaged through this model, through the people model. They haven't done that. So they would already have done maybe defining the scope and the goals,
Right, right.
that you may not have when you
Right.
start. So there's different ways. Yeah, you could spend a whole lot of time defining the scope and the goals and everything, or you could just say, make some more generic statements about that and say, we'll deal with the work process around that later. And we're going to just look at workforce and culture.
Just a second.
Sorry.
Just a second. I see that Roxy has her hand up. I don't want to miss a chance to let her
Yes.
speak.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back to Kaiser immediately. Roxy,
Good.
you had a point?
Yeah, what I was thinking,
You got to speak up, Roxy. We're not hearing you real well.
All right.
There you are.
And now we can see you as well.
what I was thinking is, I like what, and I may mispronounce your name, Kaser.
Casra.
Casser, I like what she was saying about the checklist. I think that would be helpful. The other thing I wanted to mention is I just had a question. You mentioned training, and I wasn't sure if the training was for maybe like facilitators of the ones that's going to try to do the pilot, or is that something different? Because I do think that maybe it would be helpful to maybe run through a little workshop or training,
Yep.
not too long, but just to kind of give an idea of the different things that we may need to do as we try to do the pilot. So that's what I was just asking about, maybe what that training piece could look like.
Yep.
I love the idea.
That's an excellent question. We were thinking along those lines. And the idea is that we work with you guys to define what training, because if you're going to be on the on the front line to do this, we want to make sure that the guidelines address your needs. So instead of so we're trying to walk the fine line between being we don't want to tell utility partners and wise what to do. We want to bring them in and says, let's work this out together. So we want to have a straw man that you can review, so we don't waste too much of your time. But then, so when we come to training, we would say, you know what? Let's among us talk about what would be the best way to train people. And some of these things are related. So for example, when you identify the stakeholders and form the team, you'll get a better sense of how much training you need to do.
Okay.
And we may want to we might want to run all this by the core team, but we may want to work with the pilot organization specifically in terms of what they feel that they need in order to, do that training internally.
Okay. That sounds great.
Kaiser, I didn't mean to interrupt you before. I just wanted to make sure that we hear Roxy. Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm glad. Thank you. It's great. It's good to have. See, Roxy brought up a really good point, which I hadn't even thought about, is having maybe a mini workshop with us, to train on how we should proceed. So that's a great point, Roxy. The only thing I was saying, defining scope and goals, we wouldn't need a really laundry list of a checklist. I mean, our deliverables could be enough, because our deliverable says, make sure that when you're defining the scope, that you define your team member. Well, you form team is a separate box, but you at least define your goals, what resources you're going to need, and so maybe we don't need a full-fledged checklist. In my mind, it would be pretty cool, because I think I love checking off things. Okay, done. Oh, I don't really need this. you know, or this is something pending, I need to make sure I get to do. But if that seems like it's too much in the weeds, we don't need to go there, as long as we have sort of on this form, it says what our deliverables should be out of each one of those boxes. Those deliverables will act sort of as a checklist to make sure we address those things.
Well, in principle, yes. However, it may not work for any utility. You have been part of this thing for a while, and some people, when they approach WISE, they get overwhelmed. So some people may need a bit more help. So because a checklist would immediately connect to in your brain to the ideas of what you need to do. It may not happen with everybody. And especially with people who just approach, this for the first time. So we can calibrate and not go too much, find the Goldilocks kind of thing, where even if personally you or your organization already knows this, but if you can then help us build the guidelines for people who are just, approaching WISE, it will be able to grow better. Am I making any sense to you, Kesha?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely making sense. This is overwhelming for most organizations, I'm going to say, because, I don't think a lot of people are ready for change or even wanting to know what change they need to make, because they're like, okay, if I figure out what's wrong, now that I got to fix it and I don't have the resources to fix it. It's better if I don't know what's wrong. But coming to WISE, you're right. Coming to this, it would be overwhelming. We've been in here for a long time. It may not be for us. But things like a checklist kind of becomes like a guiding document. This is your guide. These are all the things that you will have to sort of look at. And the checklist can be very high level. You don't have to go into very nitty gritty details, but it sort of gives a whole picture of, here are the 12 steps to completing this. 5 of these steps are in this section. These 5 are in the, and Cello, this is something, if we do this at GLWA, I can come up with that checklist and then share with you guys as a prototype.
Totally fine. And if we have a checklist, we can make a rule that every time we have a process, that the arrow that goes out describes what the deliverables should include, which is the checklist that you mentioned. That would be very helpful, because later on we can link that object with the actual artifacts that were developed as examples in other organizations. Yep. So that is a great idea, and we can iterate to find, whatever works best. We're just introducing, Scott and I introducing this today to start thinking about the work ahead of us. Mark, you haven't said anything, and you can't play the strong silent type too long with me. You know what I mean?
No, I think we're making good progress today in terms of discussing what an organization will need to implement and execute this. I think a big part of this will be what is sharing those tier 2 questions. If an organization decides to do take this approach and find out what their maturity is to share those tier 2 questions to see if that's who they want to be as an organization, because there's definitely it definitely implies a certain approach in certain things.
Yeah.
It's an excellent point. So one of the things we should plan for our team here is to have a workshop to flesh out and finalize the tier 2 questions. I mean, that should be really. Yeah. I got to write that down.
Yeah, personally, I think they're very powerful statements about. I would want to work for an organization where you could answer yes to a lot of those things, or yeah, we do this, right? But I'm not sure that, but it's not true for everyone. So I think that is something we need to think about in terms of, do we have a menu of potential tier 2 questions, and do we willing to modify it if an organization says from their tier 1 assessment, this is an area we need to work on. I think that's when they really need to zero in on what those tier 2 questions, what those tier 2 statements are.
Right.
And say, do we agree with this? And this is where we want to be before we ask these questions, because the power of when you ask a question, get an answer, there's a burden on you, right?
Right.
So, so you have to be prepared to do something with that information, or you lose all credibility, right? Especially in questions or statements that are this powerful. They really are.
Right.
Cello, I know we're out of time. I just wanted to take a very quick crack at summarizing what Kesra was saying and turning it into something. I think that what we want to do in terms of a project is that, and team here, is that we do want to have the business process outlined. But what you're saying is that you may want to summarize that in some different ways for your internal use, whether that is taking some of these activities and stuff and things and putting it into a checklist or deliverables or things that you need to address in a workshop or however. Some may want to use a process that we've outlined here, but others may want to deal with it at higher levels because they really haven't had that much exposure. We may also want to make sure that the pilot people are familiar with what the detailed process is, even if they're not going to be displaying it to all the stakeholders. Yeah. So that's, I think, what you were kind of saying.
Mhm.
Okay, Mike Sweeney, sorry.
Cello, I know we're late, but this will take 20 seconds, and it's just, it's not directly on topic, but general comment. As we, as the core workforce and organization culture team, or however this transforms to, starts collecting processes that organizations want to take on, I think it's really important to communicate that widely throughout WISE. That may just go without saying, because it'll may trigger other folks to, even though they may have not even taken the assessment, but get an idea of, hey, this is something we can do, we need to do. And it'll start building that library. And I just want to make that comment before I forget it. Thanks.
We should, this is a great comment. We should, at the last all hands meeting, we had Mert and Chris talk about CIP, that this core team can take a slot at the next all hands meeting to talk about this aspect of the work and communicate it to the others. Does that make sense, Mike?
I'm sorry. Yes, it does. I'm personally hampered by not having Rebecca on the call here, so I can't offer. I don't want to supersede her, but I thought that to do just as you said would be a big help.
Okay, so let me know if there's anything that we can do. Do you know if Rebecca is just under a lot of workload, or is there anything we can do to kind of facilitate?
It's workload.
Yeah, Mike, you had stepped away for a minute when we'd asked, and then you didn't respond because you had stepped away for a minute. But, are you interested in doing a pilot and identifying an improvement area that you want to do a pilot, applying the workforce area to? And it may be something, given what your other involvements, that you may want to apply technology and business process to as well.
The short answer is yes, but it would be collaborative internally, and it would absolutely involve Rebecca. But yeah, I apologize for stepping off. I've been pulled in a couple different directions this hour, but yeah, we would be interested.
That's fabulous. So I'm going to stop the recording because we're way over time, but really appreciate your participation today. And